You have a question? Yes, please.
You said that there is genetic evidence that shows that South Asian people sat on the same place for 50,000 years.
Yeah,
How
no,
possibly? Could you please explain that? How possibly can genetic evidence say us something about the place?
Not the place. The people living here today are descended from the same, they are of indigenous origin, based on genetics. It cannot relate, I mean, for example, there were some talk some time back that upper caste Indians came from Europe, the lower caste Indians were natives. So essentially, we do not find any genetic difference. And the genetic profile demonstrates, based on what is the mitochondrial and the rate of mutation and all that, that the people living in India today are essentially indigenous. That means they have been living there for the past 50. None of us is 100% indigenous for various reasons, particularly because all of us are of African origin, okay? Going sufficiently far back. But the Indian population, genetically, as far as the genome is concerned, can be traced to a group of African people who have lived in India, of African ancestry, who have lived in India for 50,000 years, roughly. Give or take a few thousand.
How can you tell if they remain there? How can you tell?
What he means is
what
that
they are living there,
pollution.
there is no genetic, genetics can tell you that. All you can do is the genome analysis. This is very well understood. This is very well understood. So this is how I cannot explain. I mean, in a short time, but this is not even disputed in the circles of genetics.
What can you tell you about the migration?
Migration, the thing is, the migrations have taken place as the very fact that you and I are both speaking here, we have come from somewhere else. But the point is, its influence on the genetic pool is very small. That's not true of the United States. It is not true of Australia, okay? But we are talking about the old world. There, the people have generally lived in the same place for a very long period of time. This, the genetics can tell you by looking at the variation, genetic variation, okay, and various other things. And also looking at the rate at which the mutations take place.
Just to actually, just for a reference, in Nature last fall, there was a very well-quoted article that you might go to, which has the largest genetic research that was done across between US, European and Indian scientists. So you might want to actually refer to that article, which is very widely quoted, and that's what I think.
You see, I didn't want to get into the technical aspect of it. This is very widely known. You see, in fact, there is no debate about it in the scientific circles. There are improvements, and also please let me inform you, when we first wrote I'm prepared to change my view if evidence comes along. For example, now I believe I'm prepared to trace, or at least acknowledge the influence of Southeast Asia, especially Cambodia, Thailand, and those countries, on the evolution of the Vedic civilization. Okay, so a few thousand years ago, when I started out, I thought everything came from the northwest. What we are saying now is look at monsoon Asia. They form from the Indus to the Mekong. They form a single ecological zone. Okay, and they were all affected in the same manner by the ending of the ice age, the increased monsoon and melting of ice caps. So we should look at those things and not artificial boundaries. Yes, sir, you had a question?
He had raised his hand before that. I'll come to you after that.
Yeah.
One second.
I'm very happy we are getting this question.
Yeah. I was just struck by something you said, and I'm sorry if I came late and you already said this, but you just mentioned, unless I misheard you, that the really interesting question has to do with the connection between Vedic metaphysics and quantum mechanics.
No, not really. It is one of the very interesting questions.
Could you please elaborate on that?
Okay, we can discuss later also. The thing is a fundamental problem. It struck me when I was looking at Brahma Sutra Bhashya of Madhva. Okay, he said duality is of two kinds. Reality is of two kinds: dependent and independent. And then Shankara said any kind of, I don't want to be, if people are interested, I will be very happy to give a talk on that. But I feel, I said that in a different context, we must bring that into the modern language, into modern context. At a metaphysical level, those people have thought deeply about the problem of reality, which you recognize through Bell's theorem. I'm sure you are talking about that. Bell's theorem and EPR experiment. Einstein-Rosen experiment and all that. So those problems, I mean, it would be very useful to look at those problems and formulate them in the context of medieval Indian metaphysics.
I just want to add that this can be a very slippery slope, because
I know.
when you talk about something like relativity or the nature of reality in quantum mechanics, you're talking about something that's very mathematically well defined.
Oh, sure, I know.
But there is often a tendency that, for example, just relativity, there's a mundane notion in which you say things are relative, which is very different.
No, I'm very familiar with that. My minor was mathematical physics.
But then to say that people speak about the nature of reality, that's very different from speaking about, about.
But one thing I'll tell you. Let me, let me tell you one thing. A clever mathematics is not going to solve the problem of reality. Because if that was the case, it would have been solved some time back.
No, I think we understand very well. I don't think there's any problem within quantum mechanics. Now,
that is the Copenhagen perspective. Any prediction, Bell's inequality, we don't want to get too technical. Okay? It's very unfair to the people. So sometime we will have a talk on that. Yes, sir, that is.
No, well, you have a question.
It's a quick question. I'm trying to understand the framework you are working inside of, basically. At some point you are referring to genetic evidence, which is based mostly on immediate research and science and a lot of stuff with statistics and biology and our understanding of genetics, and which I'm not very familiar with. But on the other side, you reject linguistic evidence. But at the same time, you mentioned Chomsky, for example. Chomsky, okay.
Chomsky.
My Russian. Yeah. So, but if you look at computer linguistics, we understand that most of the successes that we see right now, automated translation,
but Chomsky's linguistics is very different from.
Just a minute. I'm going there. Just a second. So we understand that in everyday use, the successes of linguistics with computer science, we see a line there of mathematics, computers, genetic research, biology, archaeology, converging to a certain degree.
I hope so.
At the same time, you declare that linguistics evidence is not good enough. So
as it is, but the quantity of evidence presented to us.
Quantity, I understand. I'm trying to understand that philosophical framework you are trying.
I understand your question.
How do you reject certain things?
No, for one
it
thing,
seems frivolous to reject something.
You have asked your question. Let me, please. I do hope that this is not just my criticism. Okay, essentially, I have taken it from others also. As long as you cannot demonstrate your conclusion statistically, okay, with the help of quantitative methods, somebody trained in the sciences will have difficulty accepting that.
What do you mean exactly? Because that's why I mentioned automated translation.
Have you read the article by, I can give you a reference, Kruskal, Dan, and somebody else, who analyzed the classification of languages? They found that, first thing you must understand is that the correlation does not necessarily indicate a cause and effect, okay? Using linguistics within languages is a convenient tool for studying languages, I have no objection. But from that to draw cultural and historical conclusions, yeah? Please note I'm open to change. But the point is, please, I can give you a reference to that. If you give me your email, I will refer you to that. Because they found, when they applied statistical quantitative methods, that some of these linguistic, for example, they found that Indian and Iranian languages did not fall into the same class when they applied statistical methods.
That is completely wrong, because one sense in Rigveda is exactly the same in the Avesta and Old.
Oh, I agree with you.
So if you don't classify them together, your statistics is wrong. Garbage in, garbage out.
But you cannot, the whole framework, you're right, Michael, but the whole framework is that we sometimes, in this framework, we sometimes reject evidence. I cannot figure out which evidence is scientific enough to accept and which evidence is not. And from this lecture and inclination, that's what I do not understand. How would I, if I study in this framework, how would I, as a scientist, continue in this way? Like there was that suggestion to go in that direction, research this and that.
No.
How would I go? Take this framework. How would I take it?
Let me give you an example.
Question taken. Let's take his answer.